Morning, everyone. Welcome to the Read Cohort. Greatly appreciate everybody attending. I know you got busy work, so it's great that you can come. I did start the recording, and we will put it on the Cohort Google Drive after it gets after I can download it. I guess a couple things before Laura starts, just things that have come out. We have a couple unofficial classes out there. There's the fire archaeology class that's accepting applications right now, and the lead read that just came out like 2 days ago is accepting applications too. It is a bit of both of them are competitive. They are limited spaces, even though they're virtual, because we want to really have them. It's hard to say hands-on when you're doing a virtual class, but we want to make sure everybody has a voice and can talk, and we can do breakouts and things like that. I'll put the applications in the chat, and we'll go from there. So we're still accepting the applications for both. The deadlines are on the application forms. After that, we will pull them out and start looking at them. And I will say I've gotten a lot of applications for both. I think we're over 70 for the fire arc, and in one day, I think we're up to at least 20 for the lead. So put your best foot forward in that application form so we can try to get a good diverse group in the classes. And we appreciate you guys wanting them, and we'll try to do more in the future too. Melissa, is there anything else any other announcements?
No, what is, excuse me, next month's March topic? I guess I'll look that up, and then when we conclude, I can share with everyone.
I believe it's GIS.
Sounds right.
We'll double check, but I believe it's Heidi Ogle talking about GISS, and especially with all the GIS work, great GIS work that was happened this last summer. So,
and she is starting that GIS cohort too.
Yes.
Nope, nothing more to share. Morning, everyone.
With that, I will hand it off to Laura Conway. I'll let her introduce herself, and we'll talk about retardant.
Morning, everybody. If you give me just a minute to get a PowerPoint up. Okay, so this is me. My name is Laura Conway. I am on a long-term detail with the retardant program, basically doing the environmental compliance pieces for that program. And we'll talk more about that towards the end. This is kind of a loose PowerPoint. If you guys have any questions, I can't see the chat right now. So if you have questions, maybe Lynn, if you could let me know someone has a question. If someone could watch that for me, I would appreciate it. Today's topics, we're going to talk.
Sorry, I'll watch the chat for you.
Thanks, Lynn. So we're going to talk about aerally delivered retardant and other chemicals, primarily aerally delivered. I'll touch a little bit on other methods of delivery. We talk about reads and retardant, and I'm going to talk about the updated consultation and the supplemental environmental impact statement that we're currently working on. So the aerial retardant program. Long-term fire retardants contain retardant salts, which are typically fertilizers, that alter the way fire burns. It decreases the fire intensity and slows the advance of a fire, even after the water retardants originally contained is evaporated. The water these retardants contain serves primarily to aid in dispersing the retardant uniformly over a target area. Retardants are submitted to the National Technology Development Program Wildland Fire Chemicals Program by private companies. NTDP performs tests on the submitted products to determine if they meet Forest Service specifications. Long-term retardants that meet the specification are placed on the qualified products list. All federal agencies, as well as some states and international entities, only use retardants on the qualified products list. So, just for some background information on long-term fire retardants, the Wildland Fire Chemicals website, which is there, and I will give this PowerPoint to Lynn so you can have that as well as the recording. But the chemicals website includes a bunch of information for the retardants. So the fact sheet is basically a one-page description of what long-term fire retardants are, and there's some additional information regarding the their use. The specification provides the specific requirements for qualifying long-term retardants. Wildland Fire Chemicals Systems evaluates and qualifies long-term fire retardants per the specification before they can be used on federal lands. Other countries, including Canada and Australia, and some states also use the qualified products list. The information that's under the submission for evaluation and products testing sections of that website are primarily for the companies that are submitting proposals. The process for submission, when we get a chemical in the lab, takes 18 to 24 months before we get through all of the testing and checking against the specification. Under the approved products section, you'd find information such as the qualified products list, which is the list of current products that Forest Service and other federal agencies are allowed to use, product information, and the product performance and test results. So that includes things such as the toxicity information, if you're interested in that, and information on our corrosion tests that we do, which is important when you're putting chemicals in planes. Under the environmental health and safety information, it includes the safety data sheets for each of the products and the risk assessments. These might be of interest to some people. They're both human health and ecological risk assessments, and we complete both of those prior to qualifying any products. That site also contains information on other chemicals. It's basically the same information that's available for retardant. So just so you guys know, other things that the Wildland Fire Chemicals Group is responsible for are the Class A foam suppressants, which contain foaming and wetting agents. The foaming agents affect the accuracy of an aerial drop, how quickly the water drains from the foam, and how well the product clings to the surface of fuels. The wetting agents increase the ability of the drained water to penetrate the fuels. The Class A foam suppressants depend on the water they contain to suppress the fire, unlike the retardants. Water enhancers contain ingredients designed to alter the physical characteristics of water in order to increase its effectiveness, the accuracy of the drop, or adhesion to fuels. They also improve the ability of water to cling to vertical and smooth surfaces. Water enhancers depend on the water they contain to suppress the fire. Wildland Fire Chemicals website includes the same information for these chemicals, so you can get the health, the risk assessments, the toxicity, all that kind of information if you need it. The policy regarding the use of chemicals, aerial chemicals, is contained in the Red Book, Chapter 12. There's a section within there titled Interagency Policy for Aerial and Ground Delivery of Wildland Fire Chemicals Near Waterways and Other Avoidance Areas. This is where you can go to find the policy for all federal agencies. Basically, it states to avoid aerial application of all fire chemicals within 300 feet of waterways. Individual agency designated avoidance areas are allowed. Whenever practical, as determined by the fire incident commander, use water or other less toxic wildland fire chemical suppressants for direct attack or less toxic approved fire retardants in areas occupied by threatened, endangered, proposed, candidate, or sensitive species or their designated critical habitats. For ground delivery, policy states that we're supposed to avoid getting chemical in the waterway. The policy also states that it is advised that a resource advisor be consulted prior to application to determine the best action or the potential for environmental effects. So within the policy, there are always exceptions to the use of aerial retardant. For other agencies, there are 3 exceptions, and they include when alternative line construction tactics are not available due to terrain constraints, congested area, life and property concerns, or lack of ground personnel, it is acceptable to anchor the wildland fire chemical application to the waterway. When anchoring a wildland fire chemical line to a waterway, use the most accurate method of delivery in order to minimize placement of wildland fire chemical in the waterway. For example, a helicopter rather than a heavy air tanker. Deviations from the policy are also acceptable when life or property is threatened and the use of wildland fire chemical can be reasonably expected to alleviate the threat. And the third exception for other agencies is when potential damage to natural resources outweighs the possible loss of aquatic life, the unit administrator may approve a deviation from these guidelines. So the Forest Service is a little bit different than all the federal agencies. We only have one exception. That exception states that deviations from the policy are allowed only for the protection of life or safety for both public and firefighters. More specifically, aerial retardant drops are not allowed in mapped avoidance areas for threatened, endangered, proposed candidate, or sensitive species, or in waterways. This national direction is mandatory and would be implemented except in cases where human life or public safety is threatened, and retardant use within avoidance areas could be reasonably expected to alleviate that threat. So I'm going to briefly talk about the role of the READ and some of the tools that are available to you. So basically the role of READ, you're an advisor. You advise the incident commander and the agency administrator what the rules are. There's on the Interagency Wildland Fire Chemicals Policy and Guidance website, there's an implementation guide. That implementation guide has an entire chapter for resource specialists. That's chapter 5. The guide is updated as needed. The current version is 2019. There'll be a new guide published after the supplemental environmental impact statement is completed. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So on that website, there is also links to both the avoidance area map viewer and maps by forest. Data is also available to create maps at smaller scales. That I need to get a link to that on that website. It's not there right now. There's a whole section on reporting tools and forms on that website. So the retardant intrusion reporting tool is accessed through the site, as well as requesting access to the database. There's a user guide on there, and it gives a lot of information. That reporting tool is new as of 2021. So we're pretty excited to have that updated and also to have it accessible to people that don't have e-auth accounts. Basically, anybody that requests access that has a valid need will get it. There's also PDF versions of the reporting forms for use in the field. If for some reason you cannot access the database, you can fill out the PDF forms and email them to me, but reporting in the database is the preferred method. The spill calculator is a tool that we developed to help determine the potential impacts of an intrusion into water. It was redone by USGS a couple of years ago. There seem to be some problems right now with downloading the program, so I'm going to be working on that and hopefully getting it to work. Some of our security measures on the Forest Service side are not allowing it to download. So basically, when you have the spill calculator, you input the retardant type, the coverage level, if it's known, the shape and dimensions of the retardant intrusion, the width and depth of the stream, and the velocity, not the discharge, but the velocity of the stream. And then the spill calculator kind of spits out an estimate of the length of stream where the chemical concentration is greater than 10% of the lethal the 50% lethal concentration value. And it also gives the time at each point downstream that the 10% value is exceeded. So what that really helps with on the aquatic side is most of the LC50s, all of them are a 96-hour LC50. And the spill calculator, what we found in looking at some of the outputs is that the most we ever get concentrations, the longest we get concentrations greater than 10% of the LC50 values is about 5 hours. Most of the time it's less than an hour. So the chemical washes downstream fairly quickly. There is a paper that's been published on the spill calculator, and I will link that to the site as well. It's not on there right now. So one of the other things that we have going on is we are currently working on a supplemental environmental impact statement. We published a notice of intent to prepare the supplemental environmental impact statement in August of 2020. It was based on a supplemental information report that looked at some of the change conditions since things were done in 2011. The SEIS includes a modified proposed action, and it identified the changed conditions from the supplemental information report. So we have completed the biological assessments for the threatened, endangered, and proposed species and submitted them to both NOAA Fisheries and Fish and Wildlife Service. We did the analysis at a programmatic scale for both the TEP and Forest Service sensitive species. So for those of you that aren't Forest Service sensitive species are the plant and animal species identified by a regional forester for which population viability is a concern. It's a Forest Service requirement that all programs and activities determine potential effects on sensitive species and avoid or mitigate impacts, particularly if those impacts could lead to federal listing. So we've analyzed those at a programmatic scale and including 71 species that are new to the list since 2011. The new proposed action standardizes some definitions and clarifies some language that we use. One of those is somewhat controversial. We used to call applications into avoidance areas misapplications, and we're standardizing the use of the term intrusion for any misapplication that occurs into an avoidance area. There's a lot of reasons for that I don't need to get into. But we refer to everything as an intrusion, and then we describe where the intrusion occurs now. So intrusion into a waterway, intrusion into a buffer, but not the water. The new forms kind of follow that. That thought process, sorry. The proposed action clarifies waterway as it relates to aerial retardant drops and clarifies waterways are avoided when water is present. So that was something that was intended in 2011 but wasn't specifically stated. The proposed action proposes to remove the 5% assessment requirement because it hasn't shown that we are under-reporting. That's probably a little bit more important to those of you that are Forest Service resource specialists rather than REIDs. The other thing that the new proposed action is doing is we get new retardants into the lab every year. And there wasn't a set process for how we would, when we qualify a new product, how all of the environmental documentation, the consultation, and if NEPA was required, was done. So we're setting procedures for that. Through 2019, all of our qualified products were similar in chemical composition and toxicity from those that were analyzed in 2011. More recent chemicals have been submitted that are different. So the new analysis recognizes that there will be future additions to the qualified products list and establishes those procedures. Oh, I should give you some timelines on the SEIS. The draft supplemental environmental impact statement was released to the public last Friday, so we're in a 45-day comment period. We're expecting a new decision on that mid-year, but we probably will not implement that until 2023 because we don't want to change stride in the middle of fire season. So more information on that will be coming out. All of the documents regarding the supplemental information report, the SEIS, are also available on the Interagency Wildland Fire Chemical website. This is my contact information. You can get me, I monitor my email pretty much 7 days a week on my work phone. That is my cell, my work cell. And if you have access to Teams, I monitor that at least during Monday through Friday from 8 to 5. So I'm hoping you guys have questions since I kind of ran through things very quickly. But I'm happy to answer questions or clarify anything I've stated.
So we have a couple questions. First one was, what are the long-term fire retardant versus short-term fire retardants?
So we don't qualify anything as a short-term fire retardant. They're all considered long-term fire retardant. And I don't think there's a definition of what long is. The advantage of fire retardant versus foams and water enhancers is that the retardant, even after the water evaporates, the retardant still is effective. It still slows the fire and reduces the flame length. That information on the fire chemicals website, there's a little bit more information regarding that. I think the specification doesn't talk about how long it has to be effective, but basically until it gets wetted again, if it rains and gets washed out, it'll be less effective, but for the most part, it stays effective for days and weeks. It starts getting less effective when we get into the months time frame.
Okay. Next question would be, what kind of impacts do retardants have on petroglyphs?
So interestingly enough, I just found out last week that a couple of forests in California are putting avoidance areas around some petroglyphs because they found that you can still, even if you can't see the retardant, even if it washes off, you can still find the chemicals that are on there. And in this case, the petroglyphs are done in a red color. And so when you put red retardant on a red petroglyph, it kind of makes it, you can't see petroglyphs so good anymore. So they're putting some avoidance areas on some of their petroglyphs. I think that's on the Sequoia.
Yeah, let me, I'll, excuse me, switch that or add on to that if that's all right. For petroglyphs that are pectin, there's probably not much impact from retardants. You can wash it off, and even on petroglyphs, you can probably scrub them off. And some places have used things like elephant snot and other graffiti removal to get retardant off. For pictographs, the red and how that's how those chemicals are affecting pictographs, I don't think has been studied very well. You can do the same thing. You could wash it off with water and maybe do some scrubbing off on the parts of the panel that don't have any drawings. But long term, I think we still need more studies on that to really know what kind of effects it's having. We hope it fades out over the long time and the pictograph stays. Right. Next question. Do you have a list? Now my scroll thing is scrolling with me. Do you have a list of parameters to fill out for the reporting system for reefs who are not as familiar with what is needed when seeing an intrusion on the ground?
So those PDF forms are pretty self-explanatory. You can kind of fill them out. The intrusion database has a user guide on the Wildland Fire Chemical website, and that also explains what goes into kind of each field. So it should all be right there. We also are going to be working on some training after I get through doing the supplemental EIS and get a decision out. We'll be working on updating the implementation guide, actually doing probably some webinars that we'll post on the site to help with some of this stuff. It's all kind of in the works right now. It's not necessarily ready to go.
Crystal, you have your hand up. Your mic on and ask a question.
Hi, yes. So it seems like every year, almost, I mean, on a lot of incidents, we have misapplications or what you now call intrusions. And I'm wondering, is it standard for pilots to have avoidance area maps for the retardant, or is it not standard? And is it that?
It should be standard. They should be available to them. They're definitely available on the website. The retardant bases, the tanker bases, are supposed to have those available and supposed to brief the pilots, especially when we're in extended attack. It's a little bit harder when we're in initial attack, usually because they're running on adrenaline and just trying to get the fire out. But those are available. One of the other things is pilots are supposed to be briefed on all that. There's a whole, within that implementation guide, there's a whole section on pilots and what they're supposed to do for retardant. And when they go through their training every couple of years, my boss is actually at those training sets, and she goes over the use of the retardant, what they're required to do, the avoidance area mapping. So they're aware of that. And when we do more training after the SEIS is done, it will also include our tanker bases, our line officers. So we'll kind of have resource specialist specific stuff, read specific stuff, pilot specific stuff, line officer specific stuff.
Thank you.
Laura, maybe unshare your screen.
Oh, sorry, I thought I did.
I'm going to go with a question out of the chat, and then I'll go back to the hands up. So we got, do these geospatial data source links above theoretically include everything from all the units that we need to know about? I've been having trouble on fires. I've been on trying to interpret from the wildlife bio perspective what some of the descriptive avoidance areas meant as far as retardant and where they would be.
So we update the avoidance area maps on a yearly basis. We put out a data call and we ask the forest to all provide new information to make sure everything is updated. So we actually spend from October through March making new maps every year. So they're supposed to be in there. So that would include all of your threatened, endangered, sensitive candidate type avoidance areas, all the cultural avoidance areas. What on the waterways, it's a little bit different. So it's not just streams, it'd be lakes, ponds, fens, bogs, any wet area where we don't want to get retardant. Those don't have to be mapped to be avoided. That's a requirement for all agencies, is whether it's mapped or not, they have to avoid the waterways. But the terrestrial stuff is supposed to be mapped. If the forests are giving you verbal direction on where avoidance areas are, that's not how it's supposed to work, but I wouldn't be surprised if it happens.
I'll just add from my personal experience, I've actually been handed forest specific layers. They've done GIS and said, here, this is what we're using rather than the national. sometimes it's problematic for the teams.
Yeah, that's another thing that we're going to be working on is doing some data governance on the avoidance area map stuff to get it a little bit more uniform and so that everything's available in one place where people can find it.
I'll go back. Christina, you have your hand up.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Laura, I just wanted to ask for clarification. Did you mention when you were giving updates about the new proposed action or the draft EIS that it's not considered an intrusion if retardant gets dropped into a mapped avoidance area when there is no water present at the time of that drop? Or did I mishear that?
No, that's what I said, but the question is maybe, or the answer is maybe. If it's a waterway avoidance area and there's no water, then it's not an intrusion.
Okay.
If it also happens to be a threatened, endangered, or sensitive species avoidance area, then the answer is yes, it is an intrusion.
Okay.
So
That makes
yeah.
sense. I understand that.
Okay.
And then I just had a follow-up thing just based on the threatened or endangered species and mapped avoidance areas. So on the Tono National Forest, we have at times on a case-by-case basis added an additional retardant avoidance area based on active bald or golden eagle nests because they're protected under the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act. And so based on the discussion that you guys were just having, I wanted to make sure that was still appropriate to do on a case-by-case basis for active nests that we know about.
That is very appropriate to do, and actually under the new alternative, we've kind of changed wording a little bit. It actually says or avoidance areas determined by the local unit. So we've done consultation with Fish and Wildlife Service for the threatened and endangered species, and we have like mandatory. Fish and Wildlife Service has said you will put an avoidance area here. In some cases, we recommend an avoidance area for some species, but there's not too many recommended. Most of them are required. But because we did this at a programmatic scale, we know that there are things the local units might know that we don't know. So we've allowed that in there. Cultural resources are kind of a big piece of that. We want it to be able to allow the units where they didn't want to necessarily map at a national scale and said, looky here, we've got a cultural resource that we want protected. So the local unit can put those on their maps without kind of identifying why.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
I'll just that you can even with talking with the AA, the line officers, do individual avoidance areas for the individual fire.
Mm-hmm.
So we did that during the rough fire in 2015. We said for these sequoia groves, we don't want the sequoia groves painted red. So that was a fire specific that we put in place. Question. So is there any work being done on the half-life of aerial retardants? How long is it good for on the ground barring precipitation?
So some of that has to do with individual areas and soils. The retardants, particularly the ammonium phosphate retardants, bind to the soil. So as long as it stays on the vegetation, it's good. What we've done some work on the toxicity of the retardants and the toxicity as the retardant weathers, the toxicity is reduced. That's usually about a couple month time frame, and there should be some papers coming out on that. And all the other studies that we've done as papers are produced, they'll be on the interagency website. Interestingly enough, there is a new class of qualified products list, which is a pre-treatment option. So those of you in California might see this more. They are long-term retardants that can be pre-treated in an area that are used, or where an area is pre-treated. And they're to try to avoid things like on roadways or power lines to try to limit the fire starts and the fire spread before they can get out there to them. There's only a couple of chemicals that are considered pre-treatments at this point. We haven't done much regarding how long they last and what they mean. The chemical companies are telling us that right now. And because it's a brand new category, we're still trying to figure out what all of our questions are and what we need to look at. So more to come on those.
I did see that somebody was asking if the EIS is available to read, and it is, and it's on the link.
Yeah. So that link, you'll see all of that at the top of the interagency page right now, since it's out for the public and we pointed them to that website. So the draft SEIS is there. It tiers to the 2011 FEIS, so both documents are available there. If you're familiar with Forest Service EISs and you're thinking you don't want to read a whole bunch, just so you know, the main portion of the FEIS is about 150 pages, and the important pieces of the draft supplemental is 63 pages. So it's not that much reading. It's also not really riveting reading either. So just so you know.
Joseph, you have your hand up. No.
Hey, Jen, thanks for taking my question. Laura, could you speak a little bit to with your presentation? And I think generally in the resource advisor community, we think about retardant as aerial applications. Can you speak a little bit to ground-based applications? We had a incident last summer where we had Cal Fire Division load up a half a dozen water tenders with retardant, and it got real squirrely real quick. So just trying to see if other folks have been dealing with that and if we need to treat that differently, or anything, advice, guidance, etc.
Yeah, we're seeing that more and more. We tried to talk the Washington office into having us do an EA about ground-based chemicals, and they kind of shut it down pretty quick. A lot of that has to do with the Forest Service still thinks that we shouldn't have an EIS for using retardant because it's an emergency action. But we sort of lost in court on that, which is why we have it. For ground-based, the only policy requirement is that we don't get it into water. So for the most part, you're going to be referring back to the requirements in the forest plan to determine whether there's supposed to be a 50-foot buffer or a 100-foot buffer. So a lot of the regulations and policy around herbicide use would apply to the fire chemicals. It's not specific though. So you're going to have to get some direction from the line officer and ask that question. In general, if you keep retardant, doesn't really, there's no runoff concerns for retardant. Once it gets applied to the vegetation, it binds to the vegetation, it binds to the soils. The ecological risk assessment runs through a bunch of modeling, and one of the things they model is a large rain event within 24 hours of the application of the retardant. And what that has shown is that when we apply the aerial retardant the way we're supposed to, it does not cause the retardant to get into the water. It stays bound and it doesn't flow. That could be different if we put the parameter that the retardant is right next to the water, as opposed to having this 300-foot buffer that we have. So all I can say is you need to talk to the line officer, find out what the forest plan states, and kind of go from there.
I appreciate the question. I also like to talk to the line officer because my experience is they say, well, I don't know, you tell me.
Yeah, and then I fall back to what we used to do for herbicides, and I'm like, well, at least 50 feet would be a good idea.
Sounds good. Thanks for taking my question.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that just my experience last year with the Dixie fire, it was just like out of control, days on end of tanker trucks spraying off of roads. That Pre-season, we might even think about like going out and painting some roads, like no retardant. That's what ended up happening. It's happened on more than one fire about that. I got a question. How does the EIS evaluate fire retardant impacts on soil biology?
So we updated for the soils section. We had a soil scientist review what was done in 2011 and update it. There wasn't much of an update to the soil section. I actually can't remember if they looked much at the biology or if they were just looking at the dirt. Sorry for all you soil scientists out there that I just said dirt. I'd have to look at it. I know that a lot of the threatened endangered species now are, we have a lot more insects and worms and stuff like that. So we've looked more into that, but regarding the other biology and microbes and that kind of stuff, I don't know how in-depth the analysis was.
Are the pilots supposed to map where they drop retardants? And what about incidents not led by the Forest Service, i.e. CAL FIRE?
Yeah. So they're not required to map it. However, I have found out that there is, we finally have access to the data on where they drop. And that is available. Trying to remember the website. I was so busy this last year trying to get the SEIS out that I was not able to check it out and see how that data is available.
It's the
EGP.
Yes, EGP. You can get, but EGP doesn't have all of them, but it has a lot, and it's getting more and more. And there is, there's a backdoor way. If you have a big fire, there is a scientist, Forest Service group has been looking at this stuff and has a lot more data and I can get that contact info. She's like, yeah, you can contact us all the time. That they collect more of the monitoring that's happening on the plains. But with CAL FIRE, we don't get all their data.
Yeah, and someone popped up and said that only applies to our large air tankers. The seats don't have that availability, and neither do the helicopters.
EPG actually does have some helicopter data.
Probably our Type 1s.
Yeah, sure.
So I see a question kind of further back about are the buffer areas preloaded for initial attack operations? They actually are in the Wildcat program. My husband happens to be a wildland fire dispatcher, just out of coincidence. So the dispatchers do try to let them know when the fire is near avoidance areas. Sometimes under initial attack circumstances, they don't want to hear about it. Just saying.
Melissa, you have your hand up.
I was just following up on 2 questions. Anything tribal always perks my ears. One from James Gatsky. Let's see, I lost my place here. He asked, how can tribes help when it comes to identifying cultural areas? I'm scrolling through the chat box right now so I can say his words correctly here. Okay, I'm getting there. Oh, here we go. Sorry. How can tribes contribute to avoidance area maps? So that's from James. And then Monty had another question following that.
So the other thing that happened with the new EIS is we did tribal consultation with 351 tribes in 2011. When I called the tribal consultation office and said, what do you want me to do for this supplement? there were a lot of different things going on, particularly the fact that we were in the middle of the pandemic. And a lot of the tribes had indicated that they did not have the capacity to do tribal consultation. So we kind of kicked the can down the road for this go round, and we basically are saying in the SEIS that we will the forests will be required to conduct tribal consultation when they do their mapping. Whether that means annually or as tribes bring up concerns is probably, it's going to be, the forest is going to decide that kind of stuff, whoever does the consultation for your forest. But the tribes should have at least some input. The forest supervisor is the one that gets to decide, though, on a local basis whether something is included in a avoidance area or not.
Okay, thank you. And one more question here from Monty. Are there folks already working on standardizing these reporting standards across agencies, not just Forest Service land, specifically to empower tribes with some policies which will allow them to hold agencies responsible for completing this work on trust lands?
So most of the requirements for reporting and for the extended avoidance areas, those are all Forest Service. We're the only ones that had to do the consultation and the NEPA document, which is why you see the difference in the exceptions. The Forest Service is only life and safety. Others have property. BIA actually has a requirement to protect property. It's within their rules. The reporting, though, that the reporting database can be any agency. It can be state lands, private lands, other federal lands, and Forest Service. Those reports will be gathered up, and hopefully we'll be able to work with other agencies as we see problems. For the tribes, you know, those are their lands. They're the ones, they should have the role of an agency administrator in protecting those. I know it probably doesn't happen all the time, but they should be able to tell teams what they want and don't want to happen on their lands. If any tribes, I mean, we could definitely work with some tribes and figuring some things out and giving them information on what we know, what we've done for the Forest Service. I'm more than happy to do that kind of stuff. But like I said, most of what we do is specific to Forest Service lands.
Can I clarify on that question a little further? We had a specific case where we did, the tribe did want this done, but because it's not precedent and because it's not kind of in policy on the BIA side, it was harder to make the argument, even though the tribe was asking the team and the agency, asking BIA basically to require this reporting. So we had a lot of arguing back and forth between folks on the BIA side because it hadn't been done before, and it would help us make that argument to require this going forward if there were, you know, hard and fast rules to require this of the BIA agency administrators.
So we have a interagency wildland fire chemicals NWCG group that I am an advisor to. We have a meeting coming up next month, and I will bring it up and at least get them hopefully thinking about it. They may just shut me down quickly, but because I am just an advisor. But they're a good group and they usually do listen, so I'll bring it forward and see if they want to talk about it a little bit.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just gonna make a comment about, so I put a big quote in the chat. It was this conversation that I had with Crystal Stonefar about that EPG data and there's also this ATU data on the applications. So I thought this is the best summary I've had of what the differences are, and the EPG data is that what we can get very openly now. And then if you want to get any of that ATU data, which is extensive and sometimes twice or more amount of data, you can email Crystal and talk to her. And it's been very helpful on a few fires that I've needed to get additional. I knew there was a lot more data. I will say I got data from her for the Dixie fire, and even she was like, well, we only have half the data. And even with half the data on the Dixie fire, we were record breaking. So it's there's still a long way to go on getting that mapping, but here's a source to get some more data.
And I did see a note that those maps aren't always accurate, and that is correct. They can be off by quite a bit. And sometimes it also shows where you might have retardant where they were just opening and closing the doors in flight, trying to get the last little bit out. So that's part of the reason they didn't want to give us the ATU data for a long time. They kept saying it was proprietary. So when my husband sent me the note that said, hey, look, this is available last year, I went, really? Because my group hadn't heard anything about it. It was available at EGP and we didn't even know it was coming. So.
Yeah, it is, there's, it's got some issues, but it's a good place to start. And people that don't know too, if you're, you have a lot of issues, or even if you have one issue and you need to check it out, you can always ask for an overflight to look. Let's see, we got another, so there's this question, just to confirm, well, what I think I heard, the Forest Service does not currently have any ground-based avoidance area standards? Question mark. They are incident specific.
So not necessarily incident specific, but forest specific. So forests that have it in their forest plan, you're going to follow what the forest plan says. They may be incident specific if the forest doesn't have other things, but currently for ground-based applications, there is no standard set of rules, except that you're not supposed to put it in water. Your BMPs may help you out with some of that stuff though. The best management practices in waterways and riparian areas.
I'm gonna ask. Monique put a big comment in here, and instead of me stealthily or very badly reading it, Monique, do you want to speak your comment?
While we're waiting for that, there was a question about the data sources today are Forest Service land only. Are there data clearinghouses for avoidance areas on other agency land? No, I don't know of any other agency that's actually mapping anything that to be avoided. So waterways for sure have to be avoided, whether you're on private land or federal land. But there's no avoidance area maps for anything but Forest Service land. And if you look at the Forest Service ones, if there's there's inholdings of private or other federal, there's no avoidance areas that show on there. So it looks really odd.
Hi, Lynn and Laura, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
I was just replying to Troy's comment about how Retardant has behaved, I guess, when it has no plans to bind to. And when I was going kind of through an introduction to retardant mapping and training by my mentor, he told me of instances where sometimes there's not ideal applications on just rocky outcrops where there's not even vegetation at risk anyways to burn. But yeah, to kind of be on the lookout, especially with the expected weather. All of that could just get flushed down into like a nearby stream or high elevation lake where it doesn't have the ability to basically be diluted. It's just something to look out for, even though it may not necessarily be mapped out as an avoidance area.
Yeah, that's correct. It's the organic matter in the soil that the retardants bind to. So if you have low organic matter or rock, there's more of a potential for movement.
Just a few minutes left. One thing I'm just gonna make a comment on for the archaeology. So archaeology is considered an unmapped resource. And then if there is retardant on an ARC site, we should be going through the same we can use the same reporting system. And it's a way for us as archaeologists to get a better handle on how many sites are getting hit, what's getting hit, and how we've dealt with it. There's really no other forum for us to keep track of that data, except for within our own files, and that doesn't help us on a national wide process. So I recommend that we use the process. We don't necessarily have to because we're an unmapped resource, but I recommend we do. I don't know. That's all I have to say on that one. And then so for our last minutes, I will tell you what we have planned for the next few months. We are having GISS next month, March 16th. And then in April, we're going to have a travel relations liaison panel. Sorry. And then tentatively in May, we're going to have a couple people speak from their experiences in the field. And we also in June have an AAIC panel discussion. And then it looks like in July, we're going to try to talk about national trails. We're still don't have anything scheduled past July. So if you got ideas, if you want to talk, we have some ideas out there, but nothing solidified. So we'd love to hear from you guys. If anybody has anything that they want to talk about, just get a hold of any of the leaders, and we will get you scheduled and get you this forum to talk to. I'm just going to add one other thing that somebody talked to me and they heard somebody say that the Cohort, it's Forest Service. And I'll just reiterate, I think we have a lot of non-Forest Service people here today. Wow, we have 172 people in the meeting currently. That's amazing. Great. We want to be very interagency, very non-agency. We are totally ground roots. And if anybody wants to help us right now, the organizing group of us who volunteer for this are really just, we are Forest Service heavy right now, but we are happy to have anybody help us. It is the more we can spread out the work, the better for us. We're all really busy, but we really appreciate it. Oh, I love it that everybody's speaking up on their agency. It's great. I love it. And I want to thank you very much, Laura. We really appreciate you talking to us and answering all those questions. Thank you very much. Everybody give Laura a hand. Yay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Laura.
On that note, Melissa, you got anything else to carry us out?
We have about a minute left. There's one hand by Mark, and there's one question we may not have time for that from Brenna. What is the direction of disposing of excess retardant when incident is wrapping up? So just wanted to throw that in really quick.
They are not supposed to open up the tanks and let it drain onto federal land. We're working on getting some stuff out on that. We've seen some improperly done stuff. I can't remember if it's the agency or the contractor who's responsible for the excess retardant or other chemicals. I will try to get some information back to Lynn on that, okay?
Mark, you have your hand up?
No, you answered it. Thank you.
All right. Everybody have a great rest of the day and great rest of the week.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Have a good one.